All right, welcome everybody to the Helm developer call of September 17th, 2020. I hope everybody's doing well. And we will start right away with announcements. Do we have any? Let me switch to the right tab here. We have a couple of announcements. I don't know if Farina has arrived. We're overflowing the list here. He's not here. So
I can talk about mine, which is just the QCon Plus Helm session getting confirmed. Should be pretty much a no-op for in terms of things people have to do, except depending on what software they end up using, it might be useful to get more people in the chat answering questions. But I don't have enough details from them yet. So.
all right.
And I see Scott is adding stuff live.
Scott will give you the stage since Farina is not here to discuss the other 2 points, unless one of the other maintainers can talk about the CNCF continuous delivery radar, or yeah, and that sounds really like
Here's
Farina.
Farina.
So Farina is on.
Hello, Mr. Farina.
It's not me, I didn't do it.
You have put 2 interesting items on the announcement list, which are the first on the
okay,
board.
so the announcements were the CD radar. So I totally missed this, but back in June, the CNCF came out with a continuous delivery radar. And even though Helm isn't a continuous delivery tool, it came out in the use category. I forget the name of the category, but it came actually out in that section. And so I thought I would share it here. It's the adopt category. Helm and Flux were the 2 things in the adopt category. So I thought I would share that here. It was news to me. I totally missed it. The other thing I was going to say, my next thing in the announcement, is I want to let everybody know that as part of doing this was put out not by the vendors, which are part of the CNCF. The radar was put out by the end users, which is more than 100 end users who aren't vendors, who don't sell any cloud native or Kubernetes related services. They're just users of the stuff, like Apple. Apple would be considered an end user. And they're the ones who got together to put the radar and have been putting the radars together. And so I reached out to them to see whether they had any feedback on Helm, given that they'd put this out that they wanted to share. I haven't checked my email to see whether I've gotten anything back yet, but I did shoot an email out to that mailing list. And if anything comes along, I'll let you all know. I even included if they want to share something in private, I'm happy to have something that way too, because I understand sometimes they publicly don't want some of the things they're doing internally shared. That's it.
That is really cool.
Right before Farina and Butcher joined, I was just saying that QCon wants a Helm session. It's not a ton of extra work, and it's basically a stripped down version, an early release version with some chat of the KubeCon session. So I have Butcher and Farina on the hook for that.
All right, next item then, Scott. Stable repo, GCP.
Yes. Without getting into a lot of details, I just wanted to mention some things that we had talked about before, that we got some costs from Vic, and they are not small. So yeah, I don't know if we should get into the details of that on the call, but they're definitely like pretty big costs. So I just wanted to note that the ongoing conversation about where and how the history, basically chart version package history from stable and incubator live after November 13th. That's something to think about.
Yeah,
I don't know that
yeah. After seeing those costs, the CNCF will not want to host a stable and incubator chart repository that are hit by everybody all the time, the way the ones we have are done today. The numbers were higher than I ever would have guessed.
Yes, and part of what I was thinking, I just wanted to throw this out here, is that, you know, we've been, several of us have been working with different orgs and individuals in cases to host the charts, and essentially deprecating the stable, with a priority on the stable charts primarily, because presumably our priority should be about production workloads, but still, I think incubator is included. And we've been working with people to try to move those charts, right? I think we've mentioned that in different past calls. One of my thoughts is, the past packages, hosting the past packages isn't really that awful per chart. Some have many versions and others don't. And given that we're moving many of these to GitHub hosting, perhaps, I don't know, just wanted to throw it out here, perhaps we could kind of revisit with these each chart and say, hey, why don't we just kind of upload your index file and move those past packages, even to start, without using chart release, or even just to start, put them in a folder, and now they're hosted by GitHub and we're sort of done with it. Just wanted to throw that out there as fodder for discussion. But I know this is the announcement section, so I can save that.
Thank you, Scott. Any comments on that?
I really like that idea. I think that would be a good way of keeping the whole history of a particular chart together anyway, and cut down the difference between distribution and development. So I would be happy to help investigate possibilities there.
Scott, you have a second item? I don't know if...
I'll be shorter about this one. I just wanted to mention that this is there's a proposal for the Apache Software Foundation to change their policies to be able to host what they call convenience packages. This is already there, but it's not, because of licensing and because of ownership, it wasn't really possible in the current state for them to host Helm charts. So one of the members has been working with different people in different areas of ASF to update those policies, and that is anyone who feels like logging in or basically creating an account in the Apache Confluence wiki can comment. So just throwing that out there, if anyone's interested, comments from the Helm community could be welcome.
Do you have an idea of how many charts would go there?
Yeah, I don't have the exact number, but there's I would say, I think less than a dozen, but highly used ones. Oops, I think you're muted, Mark.
All right, sorry, thank you. Anything else in the announcement section? There's nothing written. Anybody else have something to put? We are good. All right, discussions. Last week we touched upon Helm governance. We didn't have time to really go into it, so Dr. Butcher, the floor is yours.
Okay, so if I recall, there are two issues that I wanted to raise. One is that the official org governance structure allocates org maintainership based on what project you're affiliated with. So, we try and represent all the different projects like charts and monocular and things like that in the governance structure. But however, when we wrote the document, we didn't stipulate what happens when one of those projects is deprecated. And it seems cruel and unusual to just kick people out with no notice. So anybody who's interested in starting to work with me on revising that section of the governance, we do need to figure that out, figure a good sensitive way of solving this problem, and then start merging those changes into the governance documents through the org maintainer process. Second one is that we also don't have a process for managing the security team, and we have people on the security team who will likely drop off when the charts repos go away. Maybe not, but likely. And we probably should add other people from the core maintainers as the project continues to grow. That team's pretty small right now. We have no documented process for that either. So we have two kinds of governance documentation issues that we will first need to address, and then the org maintainers will have to vote to approve any of those. And I think because it's a change to the governance structure, we can't do it by lazy consensus. So it's kind of a larger than average undertaking. So the two things I wanted to bring up were anybody else interested in working on that. I see Scott already volunteered in chat. And also, are there any other similar governance, and Farina, just two, okay. Any other similar ones that we should consider, like augmentation of the security process in any way or anything like that? Anything for reviewing finances or any of that kind of thing? Also, Dan, I like your shirt. Not because they pay my paycheck, just because it's a lovely shade of blue.
Thanks, it's a cool shirt. I was going to say, I'm happy to help on the discussions around governance. I'm doing this with the Argo team right now. And it's funny because we looked at Helm and a number of other projects as we went through and talked about how to restructure their governance. So anything, I'm happy to share as well.
In terms of restructuring things like finances and security, I can't think of anything off the top of my head that would need to be changed or readdressed there, unless there's, we need to somehow address the thing about like pointing out security issues to other sub-projects, because I think right now the CNCF security maintainers are comprised of mostly Helm maintainers, and I think Josh as well, which is on the Chart Museum team. So if there are other projects or parties that are not currently being addressed about that, then maybe we could try and restructure it so then we have more opportunities for other sub-projects in Helm to be invited to the security review. But otherwise, I don't see any issue with the current process.
Anybody else? All right. Thank you. Next topic of discussion, the moving to double approval for contribution from the community. Farina, please.
Sure. It was brought up that we've been busy and there have been a couple occasions where a commit may have gotten in that we should have talked about and discussed. And so an idea, I think it was Matt Butcher brought up, of maybe we should move for contributions from the community, even for those that are small and medium, doing 2 approvals from maintainers rather than 1, so we can catch some of these things and have some more conversations earlier on in the process, rather than, because right now if it's a smaller or medium, 1 person can approve and get it in. And I think this is something that used to be there in the past on Helm, and it's been backed off of, and maybe it's something worth reinstating.
Yeah, so for some context here on when it was changed over to 1 LGTM, it was because we were trying to move through the alpha and the beta stages of Helm 3's development. And at that time, we were kind of like making sure that things were moving along smoothly, making sure community members could go and get those reviewed. But now as we're moving into a more, obviously, more stability is important in terms of Helm than moving forward the development. So that kind of incentive is not necessarily important anymore. So yeah, I personally would be in favor of this because there have been a couple of issues here and there. And then I've also merged a couple of PRs as well that have not gone through like a proper security review or a proper review in some ways. So it's always good to make sure that there's a second set of eyes on changes. Typos like extra smalls probably still don't need to be a second review because those are easy to merge through. But I think a size small is anything dictated as 5 lines of code or more, if I'm remembering the labels. And that seems like a pretty sizable amount where you'd want to have a second person reviewing.
Yeah, definitely with the backwards compatibility. When you get into the gray areas, it's a sticky wicket type thing. I'd still hold my hand up here. I'm all for backwards compatibility, but honest to goodness, once or twice I've broken it without even knowing I've broken it, and I thought I was helping users, and in the end, I'm still confused. You know, some are very obvious, some are just downright. But I'm totally with. I think maybe it was Butcher or Farina. He said, let's be, I think, super conservative, I think, on backwards compatibility. And I think that's right, you know, because we don't know what people are doing, even with a string going out. They could be writing any crazy script that greps and, you know, it breaks their product. So yeah, I think it's a good idea.
I'll say here where you've committed some of those, I've stopped and I've gone around and bugged people and said, hey, I want to commit this, but am I right with it? And many times somebody said, no, that's breaking. No, that's breaking. So I've gone for the second opinion. Yeah, Butcher said, no, that's breaking. And he's right. But sometimes I forget that. So I'm more conservative in doing that, and I go ask. But now for the second approval, I can just say, sure. And now it's on him to catch me.
I think Butcher better not get thrown under a bus or something, or win the lotto probably, as you said one day, because he seems to be the only person in the world that's 100% sure about backwards compatibility.
And he just says the same thing over and over. It's not like, it's like parenting. You just say the same thing over and over and over and hope your kids finally learn it.
Yeah, but he's consistent. The rest of us get it wrong,
So along those lines, I added a bullet. I want to bring it up since, our enforcer is here. I got contradicting, or maybe I misinterpreted, on changing an error output. Is it okay to change an existing one? Is it okay to add to an existing one? What is allowed, or nothing at all?
So it's my understanding for backwards compatibility when it comes to error messages is if the error message is important and informational, that someone parses that output as something to catch for. Like, for example, if Helm list returns no releases to show or something like that, someone eventually writes an end script to say that's your expected output instead of like an exit code 1, then changing that so then like their grep script would not work. That would be considered a backwards compatibility breaker. But if an error message is adding more information to say like no releases to show because a client error or something like that, the grep will still work as far as I understand. So it'll continue to be okay. It is very much a gray area. The other part of it as well is when we've had concrete error types, like if you do repository missing or something like that, you see that in the plugin package, and I think in the repository index package, you'll see a couple of like very concrete error types. And so the Go SDK, when you return like no index YAML file found in a repository, you'll return the concrete type or no repository file. Users of the Go SDK will actually use that and return that error, or will actually re-implement it. And in that particular case, you could potentially change the error message a little bit here and there to add more context. But if you had to change the concrete error type such that it couldn't be used anymore in another package, that's another problem. So error types are a little bit of a gray area everywhere. It really depends on the context that's being used.
Fisher's actually stricter about this one than I am. I would have largely said in most cases, if you're changing it in the name of user clarity, then that's okay. But I don't know. Maybe we should discuss this one more. Matt Farina and I discussed this a while back because Go the language will routinely change the text of the error messages that they return, and have said explicitly that it is not. They don't consider that to be a breaking change because the duty to be clear to the user is higher than to not change the string message in an error. But Fisher raises a good point in that specifically for commands that you tend to script a lot, an error message might be the only clue you have as to what distinguishes an exit code, any one cause of exit code 1 from another exit code 1. We don't really use exit code numbers very efficiently.
It's just not to put Farina on the spot, but in the example he gave for the double approval, it says Helm client UI changes, output messages are part of our API guarantee. So that means I can't change anything. At least that's how I read it.
I'm kind of a bit confused here as well, because I know you might be expecting a line to come out, but if you wrote code in a certain way and you stick in an extra line, so even if someone writes code to find that other line, they're okay. But if someone just parses lines of code and expects it to be index 3 of an array that comes back, then they're goosed. So I think you could potentially change any bit of the output if we're talking this way, and break somebody somewhere potentially. So this is where I get confused, basically.
So maybe because we're kind of running out of time, how about, I feel like we should have a written policy on this somewhere so that future maintainers, us, we kind of can refer to it, and we can even point contributors to say, well, this breaks compatibility because, as you can see, this is written down.
This sounds like a process hip.
Is it big enough to be a hip?
Yeah, actually, there's in the Python, like if you look at the Python PEPs, there's a ton of informational PEPs out there that talk about, like, there's the Zen of Python that's pretty famous out there, but there are also things like style correction, how you contribute code to the Python software foundation in some ways. So something like how we treat backwards compatibility in the code is a fantastic hip in that matter, because that indoctrines that somewhere and something that can be referenced back. Whereas the Helm website documentation is great for getting started and doing documentation, but it might not be the best place to like have that doctrine, an actual proposal where we can amend it and change it and then call it finalized and go through that process. I think that's a, and we can discuss and debate backwards compatibility on certain things. I think that's a better place for a proposal.
I don't mind writing the hip or starting it off, but clearly it's going to be the more experienced maintainers are going to have to put in the rules for what backwards compatibility will mean.
I'm sorry, guys. I've been Googling furiously. I don't know what a hip is.
So HIP is a relatively new process that was introduced about a week and a half ago. If you go into the github.com/helm/community, there's a HIPs directory, and HIPs are like a new Helm improvement proposal. So there's a 1 or 2 in there now, but we're slowly kind of migrating over to that new system.
Oh, a Helm improvement proposal. Ah, okay, gotcha. I thought it was like a general software term that I must be missing out on. Okay, got it. Thank you.
We already have 2 or 3.
It's also a type of Flask as well.
So just to round out this last thing, so we can have time for Bridget's discussion item, should the follow-up for this particular PR that was already merged to be something that we punt on until after going through the HIP? And so that would be the action item, is to just participate in that?
I don't think it necessarily needs to be blocked by a HIP to be written by the user to change that. I think it's more of, first, let's figure out if this breaks backwards compatibility. And if it doesn't, then we can go ahead with a pull request itself. And then in a separate parallel world, we can go and actually write the HIP and say which is okay and which is not.
Right.
And that can dictate whether that PR is good or not.
That's kind of what I thought. That makes sense. And I suppose for discussing that, we can just follow up on Keybase then, and not here. Okay, thanks.
All right. Can you people volunteer for notes, triage, and moderator in the chat as we move on to the next item? Bridget, docs and translations.
This will hopefully be a short one, which is basically just the way we generate the stuff that goes under docs Helm, that also shows up out of the command line, is we use the Helm tool and generate it in English. And without us asking them to, a whole bunch of people have gone and translated like about a dozen of those pages into Korean, which is awesome, except we have no way to display them out of the command line. But that shouldn't necessarily, I don't think, be a blocker to putting them on the website, as long as like we make no promise that they will also, appear, like they can't set their Helm CLI output to show them Korean. But I don't want to go outside of our normal, this is the way we update this part of the website, but I kind of think we probably should put the Korean pages in. And I just wanted to kind of get a sense of yes, no.
One question. Okay. It's kind of existentialist type question here. And I'm not saying the people that have pushed the changes aren't exactly right, but I'm just wondering, do we know that content is 100% OFE and kosher, and that there's nothing in it that shouldn't be there you know, for
Yeah.
for the
That's a
particular
good
language in
opinion.
question.
So the Korean ones at least have a bunch of people running through and checking each other's work. You can go take a look at these 60 plus comment PRs for like one file.
Yeah.
Some of the Japanese and Chinese ones I've run through Google Translate and looked at and said, well, it looks like you skipped this section. I can't really say, if Google Translate looks mostly okay, it's fine. If like Google Translate says they skipped a section, or if it's like, I had one discussion with people about whether or not we were saying something was provided by, because I was like, I don't want to claim that, Helm or GKE provides, or Helm provides GKE or whatever. Anyway, there's just like, I think we're never going to be perfect, but as long as we don't just go LGTM and hit merge, as long as we like do some amount of due diligence, it's probably better than not having any docs that can help people.
Yeah, it's just a question I've on this is subtleties in language,
Of
because
course.
I'm bilingual, all right? My language is quite small, but you can say things in my language or put things in my language that in a different way or in a subtlety of something that looks like a fada, which is an acute in French, can be insulting.
100%, which is why we
so-
definitely don't want to just put machine generated translations that people are going to look at and go,
Yeah, but
oh my
even
God.
on the Korean, can we be 100% sure? So what I'm saying is, do we need to talk to the CNCF on this? And does somebody
I mean, we don't have the CNCF checking to see if our English docs are offensive in any way. We're just kind of checking each other.
Yeah, and in the Korean, what I will say is that one of the people who's been doing a lot of work on that, she, before her current job, was a professional translator between English and Korean. And so she definitely knows those subtleties, and she's one of the people who's given a lot of feedback on that. So I know they are attempting to take that into account.
I suppose I'm just putting it out there just from,
Mhm.
I'm not saying nothing in life we can be 100% sure, but I suppose, as long as someone, if it's wrong up there, someone doesn't get, I suppose, upset afterwards.
Yeah, kind of. I'm along the lines of Martin. What if we, some practical joker decides to say, "Hey, I translated this in language X," and we just take it, and it's just vulgar, and we,
I think that merits having like at least the people who are being good contributors and who are part of the community who are looking and shepherding this in the Korean translations, perhaps consider making them maintainers, because what you're basically saying is that we have no way of doing it. None of us have that experience because none of us natively speak Korean. Neither of us speak it as a second language, but we do have maintainers, or not maintainers. We have community members who are quite interested in that effort. And usually that's a good incentive to kind of make them maintainers if they're willing to keep moving that forward. So it's a food for thought there. If you're willing to trust the person, if you're willing to trust them as a maintainer, then perhaps consider that.
Well, personally, in the example of the Korean, I think Farina has some kind of vetting done because he knows the person. But if we extend this to other languages and we want this to continue, we're going to get hopefully contributions, but then we'll have nobody that we know that knows, I don't want to say any particular language, but language X.
I like the idea of what Scott's saying in the chat moving forward of like making sure we add more people who want to work on this. Anyway, I'm really sorry. I wasn't intending this to take up the rest of the time. I think I got a lazy consensus of it's okay to have the translations for the stuff that is auto-generated out of the docs, Helm docs, not be generated because that's a much heavier lift than just putting them in.
Yeah, the alternative would be somehow auto-generating localization inside of Cobra, which I think is, well, it's going to be like against this whole trying to translate it by a professional translator.
Yeah.
And yeah.
Okay.
All right, thank you. We're at time. The next item was V2 deprecation. Maybe it's important enough that we should extend a little bit, Bridget?
I was pointing out one thing where somebody was complaining on a PR or an issue about the default tiller location. And I was thinking, we should probably at least give them an answer since time is ticking away into the future. And then Dan Garfield had something to say about a blog post and an announcement with CNCF.
Yeah, I can jump in on the location. I think we're going to use GitHub's container registry. GitHub is okay with that. I have been in conversations with them about it, but the images will also be up on Docker Hub and Quay for people who want to get it elsewhere. But the default location will end up being GitHub. They are okay with that at this point with their new container registry. And that just puts all of our assets and management of them in under one hood. And that was the reason for it. Those of us who are maintainers can still continue to maintain and deal with that image.
That's excellent. So I contacted the CNCF about getting a blog post about this migration, as well as a spot in the newsletter for October. And so I started drafting a blog post. They seemed very open to it, and so they're going to get back to me with the date that they can accomplish it. So I started drafting a blog post, and I was basically going to say, before November, you either need to upgrade to Helm 3, or you need to follow this process to upgrade your tiller location. I think that, did we get the new version of the Helm client so that it by default is going to use those new locations yet? Not yet.
We literally just now, 5 seconds ago, talked about where the location would be. So unless somebody has pushed something very recently.
Yeah, good point. So once that's ready, if do we have a timeline of that? Because if we once that's completed, we can conceivably do the blog post at any point after that.
I don't have an answer for you right this second, but I would love to have you drop either in the chat or in the Google Doc the draft of your blog post so that we can all make sure it's moving along.
Just along those lines, Dan, the blog post is really focused on tiller.
So the issue as I see it is that if you don't do anything, you could get into a situation where tiller can't restart because it can't repull the image. So the focus of the blog post is, you want to prevent issues, either move to Helm 3 where there is no tiller, or use the whatever version of the client that comes out to upgrade tiller, or use this image location for tiller. And then if we're going to have it on 3 different repos, potentially with the default being GitHub, then we can put it there.
Okay, so I just wanted to bring up to everybody else as well, do we want to include the disappearance of stable in general? Because it goes beyond tiller. It's also, if I want to upgrade my Prometheus, if I haven't pointed my deployment elsewhere, it's going to bust.
Yes, and we have one blog post out there already that tells people about that, but we need to, as Dan is pointing out, have another one with some more of those specifics.
I guess I didn't think about it in terms of the larger community. Do you know how many other services are relying on this GCR deprecations happening in November?
I think it's mostly stable and incubator. And as a user, my deployments point to those charts.
Okay, I will totally change the direction of this blog post then to focus on all stable incubator Helm charts, because that's actually a much bigger deal than I had understood.
That affects Helm 3 just as much.
I just wonder, in addition to the blog post, should we have something that says this migration inside in the docs?
I think it's, well,
There's
I don't
nothing
understand
in
the
particular how to move to Helm 3, but I don't know about all these other charts, updating all these charts. It's basically going to be just update the chart, right? The chart version.
it's, so as a user, I have to just go into all my deployments and point to the new location of the Prometheus chart and all the different charts I used. I'm just worried that people might not realize they have to do this, because I only realized it by listening to you guys discuss things.
Yeah, is this timed with, because I know that the stable and incubator chart model is kind of going away, right? Is that happening at the same time?
Yeah.
So in November, there won't be any stable or incubator Helm charts.
Nope.
So it won't be a matter of just upgrading you won't be upgrading the charts because the charts won't be there anymore.
The repos will be gone and garbage collected. So you won't be able to add the stable or incubator repositories anymore. They will be gone. We're directing everybody to find alternative versions over on the Helm, or actually the Artifact Hub, because we're migrating to the Artifact Hub.
We are running real late, so can we double check? Did
You
we
can hit
get
me up offline,
volunteers?
too.
We got volunteers for moderator and notes, Martin and Scott. Do we have triage volunteer?
Sure.
Sorry, I clicked away to type. Was that
was me.
Farina?
Farina.
One thing before we finish, can we move this conversation to next week, to start the next week?
Yeah.
Because I think this is really important, and I'll just add to what Mark and Dan is realizing there. Dan's realization there seems to be what one of my colleagues today had a realization, that moment of Armageddon. So we may need to, it felt like Armageddon. He was sweating profusely on this. So I'm just thinking this is something that really needs to get out there, and what's a clear migration path for people, or what they need to do, and what the consequences are. Yeah. Okay. Thanks.
Okay. I'll draft the blog post and share, and then we can take the discussion next week.
All right, thank you, everybody. So thanks for staying late. We're 7 minutes past. If there's nothing urgent, let's close this off and see you next week. Have a good week.
See you,
Yeah.
folks. Bye.